Hey guys, John Thomas here with another conversation, but instead of just one friend, I've got a few friends. So let me introduce everybody. So this is Robin from South Africa, one of our streams teachers that does Limitless, Art of Hearing God, Understanding Dreams and Visions, been doing this stuff for a little while. This is my friend Cherry. Some of you have seen her before. We've done some conversations. Yep. She also teaches, Art of Hearing God and Understanding Dreams and Visions, Advanced Workshop Dreams and Visions, and she wrote the Limitless course. So if you've seen that, you've seen Charity. And this is Andrea Barather. So from Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. She's also one of our Limitless teachers, and we'll see how much of the rest of the story we may share as we go. But we want to spend some time talking about atmosphere design and what is atmosphere design? Why is that important? So I started this journey a number of years ago. I was asked to take over this church that John Paul had been pastoring in Massachusetts. And we had this team of intercessors, and some of the people that got pulled into John Paul's orbit. He always had creative people and interesting people around him. But it was always astounding what would open up. And a couple of the intercessors had this idea for this prayer room that they needed to set up this prayer room to have a certain atmosphere based off of the colors, the fragrances, what lights they let in it, the whole thing. And so they would ask the Lord, he would give them visions, and they would paint this whole thing. So we had the back wall was painted after the Western Wall in Jerusalem. So it had all the stones and almost looked three-dimensional. It was gorgeous. One of the doors was this picture of a portal. So it had this center of light that was expanding out with all these different colors coming out of it. And the walls were all this textured yellows and oranges with some reds. And all along the bottom of it, the baseboard, it had the names of God written out on the baseboard all the way around it.
So beautiful.
And we had art, we had fabric, and we hung from the ceiling, we hung the six-pointed star, the Star of David, with 3 colors for the soul and 3 colors for the spirit. And in the center of that, we hung this silvery white fabric. And man, when I would stand underneath the center of that thing, the presence of God would be so thick sometimes. We had people that weren't able to stand there at different times. But over the years, as we pressed in for God's presence, and we were very careful what was allowed in there. We had our head intercessor was the steward of that space. And so anything that somebody wanted to bring in, she would have to approve it. So she would take it before the Lord and ask, is this allowed in this space? Wow. It was holy space. Beautiful. And so only those things that were allowed in there. And the presence of God increased and increased to the point where there would be times I'd be locking up at night when I'm getting ready to leave. And I would be scared to get to the door because the presence of the fear of the Lord was so strong in that room. There was a little window on the door, and I would hide from the window to lock the door from the outside because it was just intense sometimes. And so I started realizing, wow, there's something to atmosphere design. What was your journey learning about atmosphere design?
Well, I'm probably the newbie in the group when it comes to atmosphere design. But it's been a beautiful privilege to watch and learn from people who really understand that. I mean, I think I'm privileged in the sense that I'm being exposed to this at a fairly young age. You know, I've had the privilege of going to Tabernacle in Scotland for 2 or 3 years. And I got to see every year how different the atmosphere would be. Decorated is not even the right word, but how pieces of art would be prayed over and selected because they would release something. How there would be a theme almost that God was trying to do or release in that place, and how then they would partner with God in that and put practical elements in place that would almost help steward the encounter. So it's been amazing to watch, and I'm getting knee deep in practically doing some atmosphere design this week, actually. And I'm excited to see what God wants to do with that. And it's actually very practical. So I think having someone who understands the practical elements of that is really good. But co-creating with God, with space, it's something that a lot of people have never thought to do. But when you do, you step into a room and like you were saying, you feel the presence of God. It's like God comes and inhabits that place. And he comes and leaves a part of himself in that space for that moment. So it's beautiful. I love it. I'm excited to see what God does with atmosphere design in my life.
Yeah. How about you guys?
Oh.
So you've had some fun experiences.
Yes, I have. Well, I had the honor and the privilege of going with a team to the Burning Man Festival for 10 years. And about my third year, we had this enormous army tent, at first it was an old green army tent, a mess tent that we used that was pretty darn ugly. And it needed help. So my third year, it's like God put this idea inside of me, and it was like creativity burning inside of me to take on this atmosphere design in the tent, to transform it. And so I had this idea to do a tree of life in the middle of this old army tent to transform it, which is when I met Charity. It was an interesting story. And I had this tiny little budget, like maybe $200 to transform this whole tent. And so I was really having to think through, how am I going to do this? And went to the thrift stores, went to the fabric stores. Anyway, long story short, we created this tree of life with fabrics and vines that stretched from a center pole outward. And we also transformed the ceiling of the tent by using this muslin, a really wide muslin that we spray painted to look like a sky, so that it took away the ugly army green ceilings and opened it all up. And it absolutely transformed the space.
Wow.
And then people who would come in would encounter the spirit that was released through that atmosphere design. We used that about 4 years. And then God gave us a new directive, which was, it's a long story, but the visions of Ezekiel. So he transformed the art within, and then we had a new tent, an even bigger tent, also an army tent.
It was huge.
It was enormous. It was 90 feet long. We called it the tabernacle. And we created a four living creatures piece, art piece, and a whirlwind, and we had eyes and wheels and paintings that represented visions from Ezekiel, and filled the whole tent with that. Wow. And it was just incredible what happens in a space when you are intentionally co-creating with God and changing an atmosphere that way. Awesome.
Yeah. Now you have a very natural education that you've received because of your college and that piece, and then pulling this into the spirit. So how is that kind of combined to open things up for you?
Well, it's been a real journey because I trained in Britain in interior design, which in my country would be a cross between interior architecture and interior decoration. It's a sort of full spectrum, from electrical plans and walls coming down to, the paint colors on the wall. So I used to work in that, in business, and run a business, and we would do hotels and large houses and all that kind of thing. And then as the Lord kind of led me on this journey into rediscovering his creative DNA and the revelatory side, and the kind of journey that has been plotted in the story of Limitless, then he began to speak to me about taking all that I had learned about spaces, practically, visually, how they feel, and the difference between walking into a very dark, overcrowded space, between walking into a beautiful, light, open space, for example. And he would take all the things I knew in my training and say, now what's the spiritual perspective of that? And then I began to lead, first of all, locally, where I lived in Scotland, creative teams. We were pioneering that. And then not long after that kind of time frame, I got asked to lead a new team for our national ministry, which was our creative team. So that was a big team. And we had, in 6 years, we did 11 national events, and every one of them had a space. Sometimes that space was huge. And again, like Andrea, the budget wasn't that huge. It was bigger than $200, but it was still, and so we had, from a pool of about 150, 200 artisans who were really running with this as the years went on, we would have dancers who would literally create atmosphere design with massive flags. So you've got moving atmosphere design. You've got, God had me making huge metal sculptures. We did stuff with fabrics because I also trained in fashion and textiles. And we had just layers, different layers of different types of artists, designers. We kept adding every year as different people would come forward. But we would make each piece with intention as God would show us. And we would, it would be done with great effort, cost. Like Andrea, I've seen her atmosphere design. It's not something you rustle up of a weekend. Some stuff took me a couple of years to build in their complexity. And we've now been doing this for a decade. I've learned a lot that, what was it the Lord said to me at the beginning? He kind of said, what we've done in the church is we'll do a church conference as an example, or we'll go on mission. There's a mission space. And we'll think, well, what have we got in our bag of tricks? We've got some red fabric from Easter. We've got some, we've got some silver fabric somewhere. And we'll pull it out of the church cupboard smelling of dust, and we'll jolly things up and buy a few flowers. And the way I saw that, I thought, oh my goodness. And then I began to study the tabernacle in this journey as well. And saw that God's blueprints for every piece were so intentional. And so we've done this with fear and trembling in a good way. And like Andrea, I've been to Burning Man and seen people minister to amongst her art and stood in it. And the same with us, people have stood in our art, stood underneath it, experienced it in movement. And the presence of God we've seen, and the signs and the miracles, that's one thing. 10 years of signs and wonders have literally followed us as we've explored. So it's powerful.
Yeah, it's amazing.
It is powerful.
There's two things that you hit on. One I want to hit on, and one I want to have kind of a little bit more of a conversation. The one I want to have a conversation on is intention. That word is so key to this whole thing. But the piece of the tabernacle pattern. Because when we were trying to figure this whole thing out with the prayer when we were doing it, I kept on like, why color? Why?
Right.
What is important about this? And coming back to that pattern where God has this space that He takes Moses into heaven. I mean, he went up on the mountain, but it's clear he went into heaven. He was on the Sapphire Sea.
Yeah.
He saw God, and he's told, make sure everything is exactly according to this pattern.
Yeah.
It had to be exactly how he saw it. But God gave him this blueprint to open up a place that was conducive to God's presence. It's where He wanted to hang out, where He would be comfortable. And the colors that were allowed, the fragrances that were allowed, the sound, even down to the bells that were on the high priest's garment. I mean, I've heard people say, well, they had to have the bells so that if they did something wrong and they dropped dead, the bells would stop ringing.
Seems
and they had to drag them out. No, there has to be more than that. There's got to be more than that. But it was that sound that would happen. And there's all of these things came together that opened up a space that God wanted to dwell in. And then I started thinking about Babel.
Yeah.
Because we have this Tower of Babel where they're building this thing, and it says so that it would reach into the heavens. I'm fully convinced, just from looking around the world right now in the skylines of major cities, God was not concerned with how high the building was.
No.
Yeah.
That building was not nearly as high as not any of them, but it was not nearly as high as the buildings that we're putting up in every major city across the world.
Right.
It wasn't the height of the building. They were building something that reached into a heavenly atmosphere outside of God. And so they were creating a demonic place of dwelling so that there would be a control and a consolidation of power, that they could consolidate power. And God did not want that to happen.
Yeah.
But that principle, when it's counterfeited, is wrong. But you only counterfeit the real thing.
Exactly.
And the tabernacle was the real thing. But pieces of that, in that, it is that intention. And I heard you mention that it was God would show you what to do, and then you would do it. And you said the exact same thing. And that place of intention. How important is hearing the voice of God to creating these atmospheres?
Well,
Slightly.
obviously,
Just a
if
little bit, you know?
you're gonna get a heavenly idea and instructions from him, you got to be able to hear him. I mean, it's
Right.
as simple as that. And then, and even the details, because,
Right.
well, like for me, for example, when you're creating this art to go out in the desert in the middle of nowhere, it is temporary. It has to go be somehow erected inside of this army tent. And it has to stand up to intense heat and wind and dust. And then it has to be packed away and put away in a storage unit for a year.
Yeah.
So there's all of these practical elements going into that.
Wow.
And you have to seek God. And I need the ideas, I need the wisdom on how to do this on a practical level as well as a spiritual level.
Definitely.
And you have to be tuned in for that.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things, so while they're here in the offices, one of the things that I've asked them to do is help us with some atmosphere design, because we have a prayer room in our new offices. And it's been very specific so far what's been allowed in there. Like, I don't know how many different, just the lights. I thought it would be so easy to find some lights that we could put on the wall.
No, it's tricky.
Oh,
Very
my.
tricky.
And it wasn't just what it looked, but what it was able to do, but what would fit within the character of the room, what wasn't allowed in the room. I looked for weeks. I looked at thousands of
good
different
grief.
light fixtures, trying to find the right one until I found one that was that would do what it needed. The walls, I had a picture. I saw something actually on our Streams Creative House website where we have this rotating banner for the upcoming events.
Yeah.
And it's this beautiful blue gradient with this darker blues coming out of it. And I saw that and I'm like, that's what it has to be.
Yeah.
And so I showed a couple intercessory artists this and they painted the whole thing that way. And you guys are going to be putting up cloth and fabric
And art
and art that's on the space, but it has to be according to the pattern.
Absolutely.
And that key is, it's so important to keep it according to the pattern.
And it's a good point about the practical, because I think that's where I was so glad I had the training, because I can think, I know exactly what kind of lights we need. I probably know exactly how to get them, different bulbs, different, the lighting is crucial. You can have the best art in the world, but if it's sitting in a dim corner, like the sculptures that God asked me to make, I remember we would get to an event and of course all the lights are always on the musicians and the speakers on the stage. So I had to learn lighting, a bit like Andrea said, her atmosphere design had to be able to stand up to Burning Man desert heat and dust. Ours had to be adaptable to come out of vans, to go into big halls. But the Lord said to me, I want you to build art that needs light. I loved that.
Yeah.
And so when the light's not on the metal, they just look like dull metal. But when they're lit up with 1,000 watts, looks like it's going to take off.
Yeah.
But it's hard. All those practical nuances, the training really helps in all of that.
Well, it takes time.
It takes a lot of time.
Because one of the dangers that I've seen in the prophetic movement, in my own heart, in the prophetic movement, is this idea of, I'm not going to plan. I'm just going to show up and get inspiration in the moment. And then it's not going to require any work.
But that's not excellence.
No, it's not
excellence for
Not
God.
the way.
Yeah. So like you do worship.
Yes, I do.
How much time do you actually spend practicing?
Oh, goodness. So I can't remember who said it, but years ago I was exposed to a teaching by a well-known worship leader, and he said it's the season of the unseen 10,000 hours.
Wow.
And I don't even think I could calculate the amount of hours that it was just me and God at my piano. That's the stuff that builds the foundation for everything else that you do. You can't, if you're not at, not at peace, but if you have to find and experience that level of presence just with the two of you. And so it never becomes about performing.
Yeah.
It's always just about seeking that face to face. And I was very privileged in that sense that I had a lot of time in the seasons where God grew me. You know, I wasn't the best. I didn't have the best skill at a stage, and I would have favor in certain areas. So then I would have opportunities to really practice and hone my skill. But it was all about also really taking time. Even the practical things of just knowing. It's very difficult to hear and tune into what God is saying in the spirit if you're so focused on what your hands are doing.
Yep.
You know, some friends of mine who started out playing instruments and then they jumped into singing and playing at the same time, they couldn't figure out how to do it. They were like, how do you concentrate? And it was about being so proficient in the one thing that you weren't aware of it, so that you could just follow the breath of God. So even in terms of painting or designing a room, it's being proficient enough from a practical skill level so that you can just be sensitive and hone into what God wants to say and do in that moment. I mean, and it can go anywhere and everywhere. One of the most beautiful things for me is that my mom is a medical doctor in South Africa, and she's hung certain paintings that she's actually bought from charity all over her office. And charity has had so much prayer into them, and they release things. And I've watched how you can take atmosphere design, even on a small scale, and make it something that becomes a connecting point for people.
Yeah.
So my mom's had people get saved in her office because they keep coming back to what is on that painting, and they've got zero grit for God, but they understand that there's something there. And so whatever sphere, it's not just to think, oh, okay, well, I'm never going to really do atmosphere design because I don't do prayer rooms, or I don't go to Burning Man, or I don't have to transform large spaces. I'm learning to see the power of being selective even in small things.
Yeah.
So this can be in your home. You know, you can design your home in a way that you change up the art in different seasons. You change even the colors, that the color palette of your home, and being intentional with that. I mean, imagine what would happen in your home.
Yeah.
Imagine the type of encounters that would just begin to happen even in that space. So yeah, it's definitely about that, doing it in the unseen, but also really about honing your skill when no one's there. Because then when God gives you the opportunity, you kind of have a bit of a grid of what you're doing.
Yeah. So what would be like one or two points that you give somebody that wanted to start to open up more in their home, this idea of creating atmosphere, being aware of atmosphere? What would be a couple of pointers you might give?
I think a good place to start. I've done it in my home. So in all the journey of doing it in events, I stopped, even as a designer who's had a lot of color training, I stopped thinking, oh, this room would look great in blue. And the Lord just said, you know, start to ask me, what color for this time frame?
Yeah.
At one point, I've got a beautiful old Victorian rectory. So, you know, in Britain, we have very old houses and an old hall. And I remember once God said, I want you to paint the whole hall like a gold, like Solomon's temple. I went, okay. So then I had to find like a really good, you know, so it wasn't tacky. So really nice designer paint. And I found this gorgeous yellow. And the art, and then art, he would show me what art. And it's as simple as that. I would say, just stop thinking, oh, this couch should look good or that, and start with a blank canvas before God.
Yes.
And say, what do you want me to make? What do you want me to paint this wall? How would you, for some people, it's food. They literally, you know, have guests walk in and they've presented a visual and experiential feast.
Yeah.
And that's atmosphere design, because they've designed a dinner party. So simple, start blank, have the word there, and just ask the Lord to begin to talk to you in any way that's your passion, and bring that into how can that release something into the atmosphere, whether it's a beautiful dinner or a painting or a paint color. Yeah. And I'm sure you could add to that.
I think that you can even take a step back from your starting point, even to the beginnings, which is you need a paradigm shift.
Right.
You need the paradigm shift to stop looking at it as just a pretty thing.
Right.
Yeah.
And something frivolous that doesn't matter, or it's materialistic. You need the paradigm shift to know that beauty does matter to God.
Absolutely.
He created creation beautiful for a reason. It affects us and it affects others. And we need the paradigm shift to get to the place where we even care to make something nice
Mm-hmm.
outside of just it's pretty.
Yeah.
You know, that it does affect people.
Take the limitless class.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, no, I mean, there's a reason why God didn't create the world in all tones of gray
Absolutely.
Yeah.
or all tones of green. I mean, I actually heard somebody say the other day, green is God's favorite color because there are more shades of green than any other color in the world. Interesting. I have no idea, but my mind goes all these weird places.
He loves them all.
I think he loves them
Yeah.
all.
Oh,
He
so
loves them all.
beautifully unique.
But he made more of those than the rest of them. So,
Interesting.
but it is interesting. No, there's an emerald rainbow around his throne too.
Oh, of
so
course.
that, you know,
There's the green.
There's also
Oh.
colors in heaven that don't exist on the earth.
Well,
Yes.
there you go.
So he knows what his favorite color is.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Can't
But
wait to see them.
starting to imagine this way and starting to think about that, it opens up that value for color. Like you're saying, just realize it's more than just, oh, this is unnecessary. It actually, it does something it's actually an agreement with heaven on the earth. Like we've been told to pray, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Like that has got to be more. We so separate the spiritual from the physical that we think of that in, oh, that's just healing. Or, oh, that's just me being nice in the situation where I don't want to be nice. But it actually could be, oh, there needs to be blue in this room.
Yeah, absolutely.
There has to be, this painting needs to be on this wall.
Yeah.
I mean, we put this painting that's over here, we put this up on the wall because we'd set this up and I saw that painting. It wasn't even unwrapped. I saw that painting sitting there. So I went and I found it and I put it up on the wall. And Sherry, who's our bookkeeper and our intercessor, she comes out, she just starts to cry. But the presence of God hit her
Right.
just because the right piece of art got on the right piece of wall. Another piece that we've got over there off the camera where you guys can't see it, but we put that one up. When I hung it on the wall, Donna, my wife, for those of you who don't know Donna, she just, the presence of the Lord hit her. And it was just like she was immediately under the presence and touched by something just because the right piece, and the piece was there, it was open, you could see it, but when it got put in the right place, it released
absolutely.
that atmosphere and something happened.
Yeah.
When we start thinking that way, it'll shift things. It'll shift things in our churches, in our homes, in our office buildings, our medical.
Completely.
Like, how can we do this in the business that you own or in the cubicle of the space where you're working? All of this changes these dynamics and releases heaven. So, guys, thanks so much.
Thanks for
I
having
think
us.
this is going to be so helpful for people. Once, if they really get this, it can really shift things. So,
It was good fun.
Yeah.
it was awesome. Guys, bless you. We'll see you we'll see you on our next Conversations video. Bless you guys.